Alright, welcome to the video lecture on chapters 12 and 13. These are being combined because I'm not having you work through the whole chapter. We're just going to focus on a couple of specific parts of each chapter. So in chapter 12, which is quality of life crimes, an important concept to get familiar with is disorderly conducts. So disorderly conducts are offenses against public order and morals. This is a really commonly arrested offense. It's usually a misdemeanor, which means less than 1 year in prison. And if you look at the table 12.1, it shows that disorderly conduct is pretty high up there, falling just under, it's about 5th on the list under drug abuse, driving under the influence, property crime, and some violent crime. So this is a common offense. The one thing about disorderly conduct is just that these are offenses against public order and morals. So this can be a vaguer concept to work through. In practice, though, disorderly conduct and under the Model Penal Code, there are 3 actus reus: fighting in public, unreasonable noise or using abusive language, and creating a hazardous or physically offensive condition. Example, this would be like throwing garbage all over your yard or the street. And in particular, probably would be even more, a quicker way to get in trouble for something like this. As far as being actually arrested, in general, the ban on public fighting is really high up there. So disorderly conduct is just a really important concept to get familiar with. Some of the other quality of life crimes are vagrancy and loitering. Now, these have been crimes well before our country was established, and in the 1940s, we see the Supreme Court striking these down because they're vague. So vagrancy is the ancient crime of poor people wandering with no visible means of support. It's vague. What does it mean to look poor? What does it mean to have no visible means of support? Loitering is the crime of remaining in one place with no apparent purpose. So this is a little bit easier to work through. But it still can be vague, and we still need to be aware of the constitutional parameters around loitering. And the next crime is panhandling. This is begging for food or money. This usually explicitly does not apply to charities. Panhandling, though, is a type of speech, which means this criminal law is intersecting with the First Amendment. So time and place and manner regulations are permitted, but you cannot outright ban panhandling within your jurisdiction. You can say you can't engage in it in these times of day, these places, with this way. And that has to apply to everyone, but you cannot just say you cannot panhandle in our jurisdiction anymore because you're restricting the content of speech, which the government is not allowed to do. So these 3 crimes, vagrancy, loitering, and panhandling, they all tend to be defined very vaguely, and so that can cause some problems for enforcement. Definitions are all in the book. As long as you're kind of comfortable with the definition. Again, vagrancy is the crime of poor people wandering with no visible means of support. Loitering is the crime of remaining in one place with no apparent purpose. And panhandling is stopping people on the street to ask them for food and money. As long as you're comfortable with those definitions, you'll be in good shape for that part of this chapter. The other 2 topics in this chapter we're going to briefly run through are gang activity and criminal and civil responses and prostitution. Now, gang activity, City of Chicago in the 90s tried to combat gang activity through using loitering ordinances. And in the city of Chicago v. Morales, we see the Supreme Court banning that because the statute was just simply too vague. It could have applied to anyone who was out on the street for a long time with no apparent purpose. And it was going to lead to a lot of stereotyping, which is not acceptable. So, so we see the Supreme Court say you cannot use loitering as a way to combat it. It is a crime to participate in a gang. There are sentence enhancements for crimes committed by gang members. It is a crime to encourage a minor to participate in a gang. And RICO can apply to organized gang activities. They can be banned from certain public places, but the laws have to be really specific. As a result, because this is really challenging to do, we've actually seen municipalities and cities turn to civil courts to work through gang crime. And what they do is they ask the civil court judge to issue an injunction, which is to an order that you cannot participate in a nuisance. So it may be a nuisance to be in specific locations known for gang activity. So these are seek restraining orders, and if you violate the restraining order, then there can be consequences for that. And this has been more successful because it's easier to get a specific injunction for specific behavior and target more closely target, whereas criminal law is broad and applies to everyone within the jurisdiction. So in the city of Chicago v. Morales, the loitering, there was some discussion by the Supreme Court that this could apply to older women who are just sitting around kind of engaging in weekly gossip or catching up with each other. They could just be hanging around for a long time with no apparent purpose, and that's not what this law is designed to do. So it doesn't give notice. Where civilly, there's just a lot more flexibility. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about in this chapter that I'm going to test you on is prostitution. So first things first, prostitution, it is an old crime. You know, sometimes people refer to it as the oldest profession around. It requires at least two people. The prostitute provides the services. The client partakes of the services, and there is often a third party who is called a pimp or a John. So prostitution is the crime of engaging in sex for the exchange of money or its equivalent, so exchange of cash or value. Prostitution today largely has a double standard where the prostitute is the only one who is punished. And there has been some shift to also target the John and the person, the client in the situation, and to more equally enforce it so that we're capturing the full range of participants, because it takes more than one person to engage in the crime of prostitution. There are three types of prostitution statutes, some that punish the prostitute but not the John, who punish both but the prostitute more severely, or who punish both equally. So there has been some movement to remedy the double standards at play here, including some more recent sanctions have started. They've started revoking the driver's licenses of the John if they have sex with the prostitute in their vehicle, and in particular Minnesota is doing that, and it has there's not a ton of information. It's fairly new, but it's just a shift that we're seeing in criminal law right now. And again, some of the local programs also involve car forfeiture, and actually public shaming by publishing the names in different media locations. So that's really what I would like you to know about Chapter 12, just those handful of topics. And then we're going to shift over to Chapter 13. Here I am asking you just to work through page 520 to 529. We're really just covering 4 crimes. We're covering treason, sedition, sabotage, and espionage. So treason is the only crime defined in the United States Constitution. If you look to Article 3, Section 3, you'll find it. It's also defined by Congress as of 2006. So treason is the voluntary act of one or more overt acts of levying war against the United States or giving aid and comfort to the enemies of the United States with the intent of levying war against the U.S. or giving the aid and comfort for the purpose of betraying the United States. We do have attendant circumstances here. We need to have 2 witnesses to an overt act or confession in open court. So without these 2 things, you cannot successfully prosecute treason. And this is part of why it's not very common. The standard is extremely high. Additionally, there's some limits on treason. Legislatures and courts cannot create new types of treason. And we have that requirement of the confession, the 2 witnesses, because this is like adopted in the Constitution. So we would need to amend the Constitution to change our treason laws. We've only had a few prosecutions. Your book does detail out the cases if you'd like a little more detail, if you find this really fascinating. In the interest of time, though, I'm going to move on to sedition. Sedition is the crime of advocating the violent overthrow of the government. There's seditious speech, seditious libel, seditious conspiracy. These are all published under the Sedition Act. So, the Sedition Act was updated in 2006. Now, the crime of sabotage is damaging or destroying property for the purpose of hindering preparations for war and national defense during national emergencies. So the actus reus here is you can destroy, you can damage, you can obstruct, interfere, contaminate, or produce defective war equipment purposely, knowingly, or negligently during war of a national emergency. We need to have causation, and we need to have the harm of the damage or the destruction. There is an example of sabotage in your book. It is U.S. versus Michael, Wally, Megan, Rice, and Greg Obed. And this happened in Tennessee in 2014. It's an interesting example, and I encourage you to look it over and try and figure out, did they engage in sabotage? Our last crime is espionage. So espionage is commonly called spying. Okay, so the common term for this is spying. The actus reus is collecting, recording, or publishing, or communicating, or attempting to elicit. You have to have an intent to communicate information to the enemy. And the attendant circumstances here are that the information is useful to the enemy during a time of war. So that is the crime of espionage. Espionage has been prosecuted more frequently than terrorism. It's easier to prosecute. And your book actually has examples from page 529 to 531 of a variety of different individuals who have been prosecuted or for espionage and what they did, and if they were convicted and how long they were convicted for. Some of these have probation. Chelsea Manning or Bradley Manning, depending on the reference you use, was sentenced to 35 years for espionage. So there's just this wide gambit of possibilities here. So again, something that is pretty interesting to look through if you have time. But just to recap, there's only a few topics in these 2 chapters that will appear on your exam: disorderly conduct, remedies for gangs, vagrancy, loitering, panhandling, and then the 4 we just talked about: treason, sedition, sabotage, and espionage. If you have any questions, make sure to reach out and let me know.